Welcome to Rising Stronger Radio, where we explore mental health from a more holistic perspective to empower you to break free from symptoms like anxiety, depression, fatigue, lack of motivation, and addictive behaviors, and instead create an environment both inside and out that is more conducive to healing, vitality, and living a purposeful life. We focus on topics like the power of nutrition, movement, and other lifestyle habits, how to navigate the toxicity and pitfalls of the modern world, as well as philosophical, spiritual, and religious concepts to help you bring out the best in yourself and find your place and purpose in creation. My name is Keith. I'm a holistic health coach and independent mental health researcher. I'm also someone who has faced significant struggles with anxiety, depression, addiction, and other chronic health issues. If you haven't already, you can head over to my website, risingstronger.com, and download my free high mileage foods for mental health guide. I also offer a free 30-minute breakthrough chat if you're interested in personalized guidance and dialing in your nutrition and lifestyle habits to support energy, clarity, and happiness. With that said, let's get into today's episode. All right, welcome back to episode number 2 of the Rising Stronger podcast. This is Keith, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to overcome addictions to drugs and alcohol, or let's say addictions and or overuse and abuse of drugs and alcohol. And this is also very much going to apply to other petty habits or petty, addictive behaviors, let's say. And I would venture to say that most of what we're going to talk about here is going to be counter to or different from a lot of the stuff that most of us are familiar with, different than what we usually hear about when we hear about addictions and recovering from addictions. And in my opinion and experience, these things, what we're going to talk about, are essential when it comes to pulling ourselves out of the hole that we can find ourselves in with these kinds of things, with these behaviors and, use and overuse of substances to self-medicate, let's say. And so if you've listened to the first episode or the intro episode of the podcast, you know a little bit about my story and my background, but all of what I'm going to talk about comes from my own experience of, I would say I've faced many variations of addictive behaviors, but there was a very specific period of a number of years in my life where I would say what started out as, significant abuse and overuse. I don't even like the word abuse because it's your decision to, to identify or decide what your relationship to these things is. But let's just say overuse and inability to really limit my use of these things. So I had a period like that, and eventually that turned into what was a serious full-blown drug addiction requiring, multiple stints in rehab and just what was the closest thing that I could ever say to being in hell. It was a very difficult experience, but it was also the most important experience, I would say, that I've had in my life. A lot of good came out of it. A lot of necessary changes happened in my life, which again is a lot of what we're going to talk about here. But I say that just to highlight that what I'm going to be talking about is not just from like reading a textbook or preaching something, but not having experienced it. This is very much what helped me to long-term put addictive behaviors, as well as like, the ongoing struggle with, let's say, mental health symptoms like depression and, kind of being depression and anxiety that affects the way that you live your life. So all of these things being put in the past, let's say, put to the side long term. And this isn't to say that after, breaking free from drug addiction or overcoming depression, that there aren't days that I still feel low and there aren't times that I've had, addictive patterns and things, but never to the extent that they were, and never without understanding maybe where it's coming from or what I can do to, resolve it and restore balance, let's say, in my life. So I think the most important thing that any of us can do in understanding this topic is to understand really where it comes from, where we find the need to, let's say, self-medicate or get stuck in these more addictive patterns of behaviors. And this is where it's going to be different from, a lot of what you've heard, not a lot of what people are familiar with this. So to understand this, we really have to go all the way back to birth, really all the way back to when we're conceived. And stay with me here, because this will very much change, I think, the way that you view yourself as a whole, but also, where you may find yourself in at this moment. And so we have to understand that from the minute that we become something in our mother's womb, we're subject to the environment that our mother and our parents are living in. How stressful is it? What is our mother eating? How much support does she have? What load of toxicity, which is going to bridge into the next point, is her body dealing with? Because a lot of that gets dumped into the fetus or dumped into the womb. And so we're very much, before we even come into this earth, affected, the way we develop, affected by, certain things and circumstances. And so it's very much the case that on a largely varied basis, each person is born with different deficiencies and different overloads. So one person might be born at like close to a state of 100% of health, but it's wrong. And I think a lot of people think this, it's wrong to think that the slate starts at, 100, or we start at 100% when we're born, because it's just not the case. Some people might be close, like I said, but for a lot of us, especially in more recent times, especially in the modern world, it's not even close to 100. Our mothers are deficient in nutrients, so we start out deficient in certain things. And granted, like, a mother's body is going to pull from her own body to give us whatever we need, but it's not always sufficient. And on the other side of that coin is that oftentimes, wherever the mother is overloaded with toxins, that gets dumped into the baby. So we're born already with this burden of toxicity, let's say, which is, nobody's to blame. It's not like that. It's just an understanding of reality. But we're already born with this stuff that can very much inhibit our body and our brain's ability to function properly. And this is, I think, a big part of the reason why, which is terribly sad, but why, when, children, or very young children, babies, have complications, health complications, disease, we blame it on genetics, and there may be a genetic component, but a lot of it is this overarching, like, how we come into the world, what the environment is like that we're, growing in before we're born. That all affects that very much. And so this can be measured too. Like, you can measure, and has been measured, the umbilical cord of the mother having an overload of toxins and it growing. Again, the further on in time we get, because the modern world is just so toxic and not optimal to, like, health and well-being, the worse that gets. And so after that, for many of us, who, I'm 33, I was born in 1989. If you were born anywhere within that time frame, either before or after, it's important to also see that you were born into a fairly disrupted family system and a culture that doesn't put a lot of value and emphasis on the family system. So what I mean by that is, where in traditional societies and the way that we're, like, designed to be when we're babies, when we're infants, is close to our mothers, a very supportive environment, held a lot, getting a lot of attention, having a strong sense of attachment. This goes into attachment theory, but having, a secure attachment to our mother, knowing that there's safety around, knowing that our needs are going to be met, because our culture is so focused on, both mothers and fathers working and just all of the stress that our world brings. Most of us didn't get that. Most of us didn't have enough of that throughout our earliest and, formative years. And so that really ingrains a certain pattern in our brains too. And if this sounds, out there to you, or you don't see how this would relate, the need to self-medicate is often addressing some of that insecure attachment, or that lack of just ability to feel secure in the world and to feel okay inside your own skin without something to reinforce that. So it's very much, and all of this is going to play into, or just to help understand why we see such a large amount of a growing amount of addiction, an epidemic of addiction and mental health issues in our modern world. So then, in addition to that, in addition to not necessarily having this family structure and way of developing, or environment to develop in, that would be ideal, we're also growing up eating crappy food. Most of us, myself included, until I was probably 25, I was eating highly processed food, which is, on one hand, deficient often in the nutrients that we need. Again, like I like to say, a nutrient is the building block, or nutrients are the building blocks for our brains and bodies to function properly and optimally. So this food doesn't have that nutrition that we need. And then on the other hand, it also has crap that our bodies don't want, and then have to either process to get out, or store to keep us safe from it, stored in fat tissue, which, can wind up in the brain and things like that. And because we're taking in so much, we really can't process it enough to get it out. So our body has to store it. So we wind up with further toxic overload. So again, just not ideal. We're taking in, we're not meeting our needs, let's say, with what we eat. We are excessively sitting in school, at home, just watching TV, doing things that, again, like, it's not to say that they're bad in and of themselves. I think you could argue that we'd mostly be better without all of these things, but it's more that when you understand what a human being is and what allows us to function properly as human beings, these are all things that take away from that proper functioning. And so it's not only that we sit excessively in school, and that our school days and system is often very stressful, just for a child to have to sit for such long hours, and it's very unnatural. But it's also then that we're indoctrinated into ways of thinking and seeing the world that are not only not true, but they're destructive, especially for kids. But we see a lot of adults in our world who are very much indoctrinated into these ways of thinking, into an authoritarian view of the world, into needing to be told what to do, into needing to be, fixed, reassured. And there's sayings like that our educational system doesn't teach you how to think; it teaches you what to think. And this is important because the educational system was designed to create obedient factory workers. That's why there's bells. That's why we have like a very structured way of doing things. That's why, like, it's made to create obedient people. And it was designed very much when industrial work was the dominant form of profession and work in our country and in our world. So we're being indoctrinated in this place where we don't have the ability to critically think yet. Our brains are just like sponges, absorbing it all and learning what to think, and learning a way to behave that's very much in line with just being an obedient person that follows rules well. And again, this we then get thrown into a world that's chaotic, and we often lack the ability to navigate it for ourselves, and we wind up in uh, similar environments where there's a lot of structure, where there's a lot of being told what to do, and we're miserable because it's not really like what we want. It doesn't create any sense of purpose. It doesn't feed us in the way that deep down we're looking for. And then that world that we live in is excessively stressful in various ways, and it's really important to understand that stress is not just it's not just our perception. It's not just like the mental stress that we typically identify. Most of us think of stress as, well, so I got an argument with somebody, or I have a lot of work to do and I'm feeling very stressed out about these situations. I'm looking at my bank account on a screen and don't like the numbers that I see, so that's stressful. That's one aspect of stress, but we also have environmental stress. So if we're breathing in crappy air, which most of us are indoors in offices, in our homes, when we don't let fresh air in the window, things like fresh air in the windows, things like that. Eating, again, crappy food is stressful. Too much sitting is stressful. Not enough sleep is stressful. Over or under exercising can be stressful. So all of this stuff. But the point is that stress is multifaceted. It's not just what we like, the stress that we run into in our day-to-day lives that we think of. We have essentially like a tolerance for stress to a degree. Let's say like a bucket that gets filled up with this liquid that would be stress. And yes, what we experience and perceive can be part of that stress, but it's also this other stuff that I talk about. And as that builds, it affects us in increasingly uh, negative ways. And part of that also is that for so many of us, we live unpurposeful lives. Like I can remember back to, as I was getting into, my like depressive periods and um, struggling with addiction and things, like it was very much a thought in my mind that I just felt like I had no sense of purpose or direction. And I was going to college. I was trying to find what my place was in this world. And I don't know if I am just more sensitive to this thing than some people, or if I was just more in tune with it. But it was really a big struggle for me, and a big thing on my mind of like not wanting to live a a life that was just mundane and going through the motions and with no meaning. And I think you can create meaning out of anything. It doesn't like you can be anywhere in any situation in your life and create meaning if you know how to do that without changing any of it. But I very much had the sense that like I didn't want to just wind up doing something for the sake of doing it. I didn't want to just wind up in like a career or in a situation that I did because I didn't know what else to do. I yearn for purpose, and I think we all do. I think we all have this yearning to find something purposeful in our lives, and there's a reason for that. Like I think deep down built into us, there's a reason that we yearn for purpose, because I think we all have a purpose here. I think we all have something that we're good at, that converges with something that we've experienced to kind of pull that gift out of us. And I think we're meant to struggle to find that purposeful way of existing. And maybe it's something that we do as a profession to make an income, but maybe it's not necessarily just about like making money. It's about living purposefully. But I believe very strongly that there's a reason that people get miserable when their lives aren't purposeful, and it's because we have a built-in mechanism to tell us like, this is your life, this is your one life. Are you going to waste it on something that like isn't worthwhile? Are you going to ignore the fact that you have something in there that is asking to be developed and shared with the world, to help people, to help yourself um become more? And so I think that's a significant stressor, but it's also just a significant part of the world that we live in, that because we lack that thrill of what it means and what it's like to chase something purposeful to become a purposeful person, we then wind up medicating. We wind up needing to distract ourselves. We find purpose in like Netflix shows and exciting movies where it brings that out of us for, in an intense way for a short period of time. But it also highlights how far we are falling short from the purposeful life that we could be living. I think it's why we often love, movies and shows and to watch other people, do things purposefully, is because we yearn for that ourselves, and because we're so emotionally like tuned down that we need something intense to bring it out of us, because we're not used to finding it in like our day-to-day world. And then I'd say the last thing to build on just the understanding of the world that we live in is that most of us are very disconnected to ourselves or from ourselves and our surroundings. And what I mean by this is ties back into some of the earlier points that like most of us have no real understanding of what it means to be human, like what it is to exist within our bodies, what it means to exist in relation to other people, in relation to nature, in relation to something greater. And when we're disconnected like that, there's really nothing sacred anymore. There's nothing that pulls us toward something higher, both internally and externally, both in this world and maybe, outside of this world or above this world. But when we don't understand what is required for us to stay well, like we're all looking for a sense of well-being. If you've maybe never thought of it this way, consuming some sort of drug or drinking or watching porn or doing something, all of these are attempts to fill a sense of emptiness inside. They're all attempts to try to find a sense of safe love, security. I'll get into that a little bit more. And just to escape this sense of lack, this inability to feel okay in our own skin without something, without something external. And largely that's because we're disconnected with just how to keep ourselves well. But it's possible. It's 100% possible. It is available to all of us should we decide to pursue it, to find purpose and to find, or I'm sorry, not purpose, to find like a greater sense of well-being, the ability to feel comfortable in our own skin. And again, that's multifaceted too, but it's there, and we just need to reconnect to the understanding of how to find it. And same thing with our surroundings, like just how to know what draws you closer to well-being, what draws you closer to inner peace and a sense of purpose and happiness, which we're going to redefine happiness too if I remember to touch on that. But it's learning to understand who you are and where you are in the world. And when you understand where you are, you can go somewhere else. And that's like the most important thing. None of us know what we are, where we are, and so we have no sense of like what could be different or change in order to make it better, to make ourselves feel better, or to be better. And so the result of all this stuff is, maybe you've heard of this, but most of us are familiar with PTSD, where there's like an intense form of trauma, or maybe seeing somebody die, or being some sort of, I don't even want to go into them, but significant trauma. And then there's a newer understanding, newer relatively, of what's called complex PTSD, where there's not necessarily a one significant or huge event to create the trauma, but there are smaller like chronic stressors over longer periods of time that have essentially the same or a similar effect on a person, on the nervous system. So what all of these things that I describe is, essentially lead to is these states of like very similar to trauma, where a nervous system is just dysregulated, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Um, but just this inability to settle, this inability not to have to be on guard, this inability to, or this kind of like just stuck in fight or flight. And a lot of us don't even realize that's there because it's just always there. We don't even realize that like it could be different because we're just most of the time stuck here and it becomes our normal. And therefore, in order to find some sense of feeling okay, we need something outside because we're unable to connect to it inside. So we have that CPTSD, complex PTSD, and mild traumas, nervous system dysregulation, nutrient deficiencies. So I'm connecting all this to what I was, kind of the list that I was going through. Toxic overload, poor patterns, poor self-image, poor thought patterns. And all of these things just affect how we perceive ourselves, how we show up in the world. If we can fall and stay asleep, if we have energy, if we feel, a sense of, let's say, optimism toward the things that we're facing in our lives, toward the challenges that we're facing. And, a lot of these things are what lead to then the mental health issues, which again, we see in such a high number in this day and age that we're required to self-medicate for or get involved in some sort of other type of medication, which we'll get into. And so what all this leads to, the point of it is that we have to accept and come to an understanding that we need to heal. That's the answer really here. Is it's critically important to see that the reasons that we are the way that we are, and let's say in this case specifically, like struggling with like overusing ways of self-medicating, drugs and alcohol, we have to see that the answer to them is to first accept that we need to heal and then to proceed with healing. And that's the reason that's so important, is because to just think that we're that way because, like, just because it is, and there's no really way of changing it, there's no way of there's no reason behind it, maybe just like we have a predisposition, which could be true, like a predisposition to drink more, to overuse things, although I don't have a conclusive opinion, but I think much less than our culture values or thinks genetics play into this. I think it's significantly lower. And so that's important, but also accepting our need to heal. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought on that. Recognizing our need to heal. Oh, it allows us to not just see that like we just have to stop this thing and we face this like undeniably difficult state of being, like I need it, I stop it, and I don't feel right, I don't feel like I can exist without it. And sure, there's like time goes on and that need lessens a little bit, but for most people it never really goes away. And the reason for this again is if we don't realize that we need to be putting stuff back in and we need to be taking stuff out, purging our, let's say, indoctrinated and ineffective ways of thinking and seeing the world, ridding ourselves or partaking in practices to help our body get rid of like the toxic overload, which this stuff affects. When we talk about toxic overload, this is stuff that affects the brain, the nervous system. So a lot of people again kind of write this off to like like beach women type of thing, like doing juice fasts and cleanses and detox to lose weight, and like that is a thing. But for most everybody in this world, and I would say everybody who struggles in any way with substance abuse, like there is a toxicity that we carry that affects our brain and nervous system. And I mean, the brain is a part of our nervous system, but like these parts of us that govern how we are in the world. And so we need to understand what it can be, or getting these things out. We need to replenish. We need to restore our nutrient reserves. We need to, replete ourselves. And this is again because we tend to think of like the way that we think, act, and feel as like just something. But when we talk about nutrition, the reason why this is so important is not, there's a specific reason behind it. There are reasons, because these things build our neurotransmitters, build the way the build our ability to think and function optimally. So it's not just letting go of drinking and using drugs or whatever addictive behavior. It's also coming to see that there are things that need to be done, that in order to actually let that go, in order to feel like we don't need it, to not just have to fight about it, against it, for it not to just be like an everyday battle, that we feel like we're just always at war. By replenishing, by doing these things that I'm talking about, which I will go into more detail about, we can get to a point where that stuff just sits to the side and there's really no desire for it, because we've refilled, and maybe refilled or filled for the first time, that thing inside of us that felt empty, that felt like it needed something else. And so the first step to healing is recognizing the toxicity of the culture we live in. And I'm using toxicity broader here, not like a toxin that you ingest or that winds up in your body, but in a broader sense, there is that. And then also just the world we live in is ridiculously inconducive to health and happiness and well-being. And so we need to recognize that. There's a quote by someone named Jiddu Krishnamurti that I like to quote a lot, that says, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And what this means is, once you understand that the world we live in is just sick, like we're sick physically, we're sick spiritually, we're sick mentally, we're sick emotionally. And again, it's not like, this isn't putting people down. It's just recognizing where we're at. And by sick, I mean not well, like not functioning optimally. Once you recognize that, the next step of that is then seeing, well, if I'm just like everybody else, or if I fit in really well, I'm probably sick too. So it's no measure of health. Like, it doesn't mean that you're healthy just because you can go out into the world and like participate and kind of blend in. It's the opposite. If you look around and you're doing what everybody else does, maybe that's like going out and drinking on weekends, or drinking or getting high every night after work, throwing food in the microwave, or just ordering stuff on Grubhub or whatever, and you see that that's what everybody else is doing, here are some clues. Here are some clues that can help to turn things around, to change things. We have to, in my opinion, it's absolutely critical to see these things, and then to see that if you want your life to change, if you want to change as a person, and I don't mean just change for nothing, but like become the person that in your heart that you should be and you can be, and that you're yearning to experience life as, like, we have to be able to change the way that we live, and recognize where a hierarchy of what's important to change. So I said it a little bit earlier, but to change where you are, you have to know where you are first. To go somewhere else, you have to know where you're starting from, or know where you are currently. And so I think that substance use disorders, addictions, are very often paired with mental health symptoms, depression, anxiety, just obsessive thinking, compulsive thinking. And it's even important to take a step back here and understand that these things are not what we have understood them to be either. And, depending on how much you have, how much time you've put into understanding these things, or how much exposure you've had to like mental health professionals, most of these things we're led to believe are causes. They are just conditions that then need to be addressed, which is based on the actual science and like the much higher level professionals is just completely inaccurate. And it's also, in my opinion, experience with both myself and working with others, just wrong. The better way to see all of these is just as symptoms. So depression, not a disease, it's a symptom. Anxiety disorder, like symptom. All of it is better off seen and more true to see as a symptom. And when we see them as symptoms, we then again see that these, like, what can underlie depression? Well, excessive stress, nutrient deficiencies, poor sleep, which can be from excessive stress and nutrient deficiencies. And nutrient deficiencies and excessive stress can be from poor sleep. Like, all of this stuff ties in together. It's all like a web that interconnects. But if you take some of the most significant, let's say if I were facing depression and know what I know now, like what I would address first and foremost, it would be, in no particular order, cutting out junk food and eating well, so that I'm getting the nutrients that I need and taking the burden off of my digestive system and gut, which very much affects the brain, and stopping like poisoning my brain, because when we take that in, it gets into the bloodstream and can, affect, if not directly, get to the brain. Focusing on hydration, getting enough movement, walking, strength training, things like that, learning to breathe properly, getting enough sleep, getting outside enough. I think those would be the main physiological components. And then focusing on community, focusing on learning a new skill, which is why I'm really big on something like kettlebells, where there's a skill focus. You get movement and skill. That is important, just the skill building for the brain. Potentially community if you're doing it in a group setting, but community, whether it's involved in that or otherwise, people, good people, uplifting people, cutting out any kind of toxic information or bringing in any kind of toxic information, so that anything I'm listening to or watching is something positive, uplifting, reinforcing. Those would be a few that I would name. The reason that I just went through all that is, if you take the average person in our world, all of those are inverse. All of those are flipped upside down. Eating crappy, not sleeping enough, improper breathing patterns, dehydrated, really no positive sense of community or purpose, excessive stress in their life, not enough movement or exercise. So the point that I'm making is just, when we see that there's this rise in mental health and addiction issues, it's all right there. Like, there's reasons for it. There's 110% reasons that it's happening now in the way that it is. And it's really the only way, in my opinion, to actually overcome these things and put them behind us, and not just have them always right in front of our face. And even if we're not, indulging or doing them, that it overcomes us and becomes, like God to us per se, that it's the main thing that we're focusing on at all times. And so that is all to say that the way that we view mental health issues is incomplete and incorrect. And incomplete is the right word, because it's not that these things aren't real. They are. Like, the symptoms that I can say very much with my own struggles, like, I've had some very significant times where my mental health has taken me down into dark places, like literally and metaphorically. It's just that we have to understand them in a bigger sense in order to actually deal with them properly. And it's the same thing. I'm not going to go too far into this here, but why, like, medications in this realm, I mean, I would have to say, and I don't, like, please, this isn't medical advice, and don't make a decision based off like my opinion, but I think these things cause more harm than they do good for most people in the long run, even in the medium term. Sometimes they have positive effects in the short term, but I think they lead to increasing problems, and the science behind them is terrible. There are many books written. There are many, there's much analysis of these things, and they're ultimately just addressing the symptom, which is what our medical system is. It's reductionistic. So we focus on treating symptoms rather than understanding and balancing out where there's imbalance and where the cause of our conditions may be, let's say. So we see mental health issues wrong. We see disease wrong. Not going to go into this too deep either, but even just it's very important to understand that like our genetics are not the only thing that determine our state of health and well-being. Epigenetics, which are all these things I'm talking about, our sense of purpose, our stress levels, the amount of like traumas we faced, whether we're getting nutrient dense food out in nature, getting sunshine, all these things. This is what either turns that switch of like a gene on or off, or have an influence on. I like to teach people that I work with like a dimmer switch. They can either turn it down or up. It can potentially be turned completely off or completely on. But at the very least, we can dim, the light if something negative, let's say, or turn something up if it's a positive gene or trait. And this also overlaps with addiction and how we see addiction and genetics. And I'm framing all of this within just our cultural misunderstandings of these things. But I would also say that we're, wrong about happiness and pleasure. We're completely disconnected from what real happiness is, and it not being contingent on, I just got a new watch or a new phone or a new car, or I'm gonna get a car, or I'm gonna get a good meal coming in, or a tasty meal or whatever. And this can be called like the hedonic treadmill, whereas we're on this like hamster wheel, and we're just always going, always trying to find something, pleasurable, and we find it and it lasts for, whatever amount of time, seconds, minutes, hours, days, maybe weeks, but it just wears off and we need more. So the more we seek pleasure, the more we stimulate pleasure in these like external high stimulation ways, the less we enjoy stuff, and we become dependent on scrolling through social media, porn, drugs, alcohol, all the stuff that we're talking about. And so what do we need to do? Like, what is the answer? This is, all of that. And thank you for listening to all of that. I hope it makes sense to you. But all of that is to set up that in order to find, and I've given like hints throughout, but in order to find ways of overcoming and like reestablishing our hold on our own habits and patterns, and not being subject to these things that bring us down, maybe bring us up at first. Like, there's no denying that all these pleasures like have their place, and there's a reason why we gravitate toward them. But again, especially with drugs and alcohol, it's just every time it's lower and lower, and we just don't find that high or that state that we're looking for. And it's never gonna, like, we're never there is never a permanent resolution in any of that, but there are permanent resolutions elsewhere. And so, I mean, I would really say that if you understand the need to heal, and you're starting to understand where you are so that you can go somewhere else, it's about taking on a new way of living, about seeing that, in a world that is just burdened sick, that you have to do things that other people aren't doing, and not do things that other people are doing in order to get better, in order to grow and heal, in order to exist differently. And so I have touched on a lot of stuff, and this is going to be what will be what I will focus on in future episodes, is stuff like nutrition and a lot of this that I've alluded to. But I think just some concepts that are important to focus on for change are recognizing and letting go of destructive habits. So the recognizing the recognizing part I think is the more important. Just being able to identify where we might have some sort of habit or behavior or ritual. All this stuff becomes ritualistic, um, and just knowing it, knowing that when I'm just, you know, overeating junk food, that it's not ideal. Knowing that when I drink or over drink or drink excessively, it's not ideal. Knowing that when I'm using drugs, it's not ideal. Knowing that watching porn and all that comes with it is not ideal and isn't going to lead to anything. And all this stuff, even if it brings you up, it brings you down further. Knowing that, accepting that, recognizing it, recognizing destructive habits, and then understanding that, like, both on a or on a mental, physical, and spiritual level, like, we're in need of healing. There's so few people in this world who are well integrated and like really have like health on any of those levels. And so on the physical level, it's things like all the stuff I've been talking about. I'm not going to repeat it, but maybe I will. Eating better, recognizing where that can be done, understanding, starting to try to understand how food influences the way that you think, act, and feel, what you're eating and when. Um, Focusing on getting better sleep. Like, your body, just like if you fall and scrape up your elbow, your body's going to scab it up and heal it. We're designed to heal in every other way from everything else. The problem is that in that analogy, we're scraping our arm constantly. So we never really have a chance to heal. So it's about, on these other levels, giving ourselves the environment that we need in order to heal, to be able to start to heal. And again, that's soul, spirit, mind, body. Like, we have to create that. And we're going to talk about that. So I'm not intentionally being vague, but these are, kind of deep topics. And they differ a little bit for each person, potentially. I think that it's really important not to settle for living without purpose, or not to not to settle for a purposeless way of existing. And again, it may be in career, it may be just with your life outside of how you make a living. But we need purpose. We need reasons to get up. We need reasons to do the things we do. We need reasons to do the things we do well and do them consistently. And so whenever we're feeling that, it is an inner calling, it is an inner yearning to recognize and to change, like, how we're being, to change how how and what we do. And then I think maybe one of the most important things, and this is like, I'm addressing this to other men who are going through similar challenges to what I face, is recognizing the importance of doing things that aren't comfortable. And I would couple that with like getting strong. I've come to a place that I'm not super big on just going to the gym and like what that can entail, although that might work for some. For a while that was me, and there are reasons that I've kind of scaled back from that. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of kettlebells, largely because they set you up to be strong in a real life way. You can do them outside, which I think is incredibly important, grounded, feet on the earth, getting fresh air, getting sunshine. You don't have to pay for gym memberships. You can take them anywhere. It's portable. But I think that the focus on getting stronger, and I'm using the word strong in particular because I think that it is important how we look, because it's how we present ourselves. And we know, based on how we look, that other people perceive us in certain ways. And people understand when, just by looking at somebody, it's not like it's good or bad. And I'm not saying that it like this is ideal. It's just the way that it is. People understand when looking somebody how they view themselves based on what they see in front of them. So like the way that you show up, a person can see, is this person disciplined? Do they really care for themselves? Are they in tune with their own needs? Things like that. And we not even be thinking this consciously in making these assessments, but we do. So I think that getting strong and what comes along with that, just like eating well, doing things to support our body being at an optimal body weight, are really important and uh, offer something tangible and significant for transformation, like internally and externally. And just having a regular anchor and practice of doing something difficult in a world where we're obsessed with whatever feels good right now. Um, and I think that I think that that is, maybe the biggest takeaway I'm going to end with that is just to see that in, even if right away stopping whatever addictive behavior isn't possible, it's about alongside of it building the things that are positive and building the things that are that are going to help us to establish a foundation where we don't need this. So it's not like a black or white. It's not a, it's not that. It's starting to bring these things into our lives and starting to make them a bigger part of it. But the delayed gratification and the purposely subjecting ourselves to uncomfortable situations like working out, like cold showers, like these things are the remedy and the antidote to this constant need for, pleasure and stimulation. And it is on both a like a chemical level in our brains, in a psychological level with how we see ourselves in our lives, on a physical level. We need to open ourselves up more to getting comfortable being uncomfortable, but also finding pleasure and discomfort and finding the pleasure and the comfort that come as a result of being uncomfortable. In other words, if I'm just bored in my house and ungrateful for what I have, if it's winter and it's freezing out and I go outside with no coat and shorts for like 10 or 15 minutes, maybe not even that long, maybe 2 minutes, and I'm freezing, when I come back in, I'm going to be reminded how amazing it is that I have a warm home and a sweatshirt and a sweatpants or a blanket or whatever, a warm bed. That's why discomfort is so important, is because it allows us to truly value what's comfortable. And until, fairly recently in the existence of the world, like this was all naturally built in. We didn't have all the comforts and luxuries constantly that we do today. And so a lot of this stuff just wasn't a problem for people, but we need to, especially as men, reconnect to these discomforts in order that we can, find comfort again. And all of them, again, help with depression. They help with anxiety. They help with, finding balance in our lives. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, you can feel free to leave them in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send me an email, keith@risingstronger.com. If you're not sure where to start with changing food, I have on my website, risingstronger.com, a free guide, high mileage foods, or it contains what I call high mileage foods. It is called The Right Food Can Be Medicine for the Mind, but it's a great place to start. There are some simple foods that you can find almost anywhere that should make up a significant portion of what we're eating if we want to feel good, be strong mentally and physically, have energy, and heal. And healing and food and nutrients are very important for healing. So check that out. Thank you again for your time, and I will see you on episode 3 soon. All right. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and head over to risingstronger.com. You can join my growing email list by entering your email address or downloading my free guide, the High Mileage Foods for Better Mental Health Guide. I do offer a free 30-minute coaching consultation. You can sign up for that there as well. And again, I appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next episode.